Time magazine called him the unsung hero behind the internet. CNN called him a father of the internet. President Bill Clinton called him one of the great minds of the information age. He has been voted history's greatest scientist of African descent. He is Philip Emeagwali. He's coming to Trinidad and Tobago to launch the 2008 Kwame Ture lecture series on Sunday, June 8th at the JFK Auditorium, UWI St. Augustine, 5 p.m. The Emancipation Support Committee invites you to come and hear this inspirational mind address the theme, Crossing New Frontiers to Conquer Today's Challenges. This lecture is one you cannot afford to miss. Admission is free, so be there on Sunday, June 8th, 5 p.m. at the JFK Auditorium, UWI St. Augustine.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm Philip Emeagwali. The computer is the greatest invention since fire. The modern supercomputer is the greatest invention in modern physics. I believe that we are witnessing a technological change of tectonic proportion. Each generation redefined the word computer. Our descendants' definition of the computer will perhaps become synonymous and correspond to our phrase, planetary-sized super brain that enshrouds our Earth. In year million, I foresee each post-human person as a super intelligent cyborg that is part human, part machine, and part computer, and that has a great sense of humor. I foresee their super brains as enshrouding even the solar system and as one super being that can live forever. When parallel supercomputing meets the biggest questions in computational science, the impossible to solve becomes possible to solve. Parallel supercomputing is the vital technology that enables us to ask the biggest questions and then find new answers to those previously unanswered questions. I'm Philip Emeagwali. Back on February 1, 1922, a science fiction story was published in the book titled Weather Prediction by Numerical Process. That science fiction story described how, in theory, 64,000 human computers could be employed and used to solve the partial differential equations that must be used to predict the weather for the whole Earth. Back on June 20, 1974, in Corvallis, Oregon, United States, the day I began programming supercomputers, I set my mind on programming the fastest supercomputer. A decade later, my supercomputer hopeful became a new internet that is a new global network of 64 binary thousand processors. On July 4, 1989, I figured out how to hindcast the weather and do so 1 mile deep inside an oil field that is the size of a town. That massively parallel supercomputer that is a new internet de facto that I set my mind on ultimately became my signature invention that became the subject of school reports. My contribution to the development of the computer is this: I was the first person to figure out how to turn the science fiction of parallel processing across millions of processors into the non-fiction that is today's supercomputer that occupies the space of a soccer field. The reason I remember the date I discovered practical parallel processing was that it was the US Independence Day. You cannot study to become the first parallel supercomputer scientist. You can study to become an aerospace engineer, but you cannot study to become the first astronaut or to travel to the planet Mars. You become a pioneer astronaut by becoming the first person to travel to Mars. Similarly, you cannot study to become the first person to figure out how to harness practical parallel supercomputing and do so to solve real-world problems. I'm Philip Emeagwali. I became the first parallel supercomputer scientist because I was the first person that performed the world's fastest parallel processed calculations that solved real-world problems, and because I was the only person to accomplish that alone, as opposed to team research. What is the world's fastest computer? Speed is at the core essence of the supercomputer. The first newspaper article on the supercomputer was dated February 15, 1946, and appeared on page 1 of the New York Times. That first newspaper article was titled, quote, "Electronic computer flashes answers, may speed engineering," unquote. Airplanes fly at about the same speed they flew in the 1950s. If today's parallel supercomputer speed of 1,000 million billion calculations per second was discovered in the 1950s, that decade's supercomputer could compute 3 million billion times faster. That first supercomputer of 1946 could only perform 385 multiplications per second, or 40 divisions per second, or 3 square root calculations per second. That first supercomputer was about 1,000 times faster than the fastest computing aid of the time. That supercomputer speed increase from 1946 to present is like an airplane completing a 30,000-year-long trip to a distant galaxy in just one day. The car of today has 1 engine and 4 tires, just as it had a century ago. By comparison, the fastest supercomputer of today has 10.65 million processors, or 10.65 million electronic brains, instead of the 1 electronic brain that it had in mid-1989. The progress achieved in supercomputer technology is akin to completing in 1 day an intergalactic outer space travel that might have taken 300 centuries if the same trip had started in 1989.
Insightful and brilliant lecture.